I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles, but I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Well, welcome back to The Lone Bulwark. I am Stephen Wolf. Thank you for joining me. If you're on YouTube, then you're watching this with ads, which is cool. You know, watch the ads, buy stuff. But also you can get this ad free at thelonebulwark.supercast.com, thelonebulwark.supercast.com. Included in those various, tiers, packages you can subscribe to would be my Scholar Series, where I go through the sort of things you would have learned if you took a classical education. And also, the Ars Politica show is back. That is with myself and Thomas Acord. And we go through topics of Western tradition, Western civilization for Western man. Really great stuff. So check that out again, thelonebulwark.supercast.com. So today, I want to talk about the common good. The common good. The public good is also what it's called. So I was recently in a discussion, / debate with David Reese at the Right Response Conference. And at that, we talked about basically the extent of civil power. But what I realized during the discussion and afterwards was one idea that probably made it difficult for some in the audience to take my side was a rejection, or perhaps they had not considered the idea of the common good. So David's main emphasis was on the individual justice. And I think there is a justice for the community as such. And I think many people have not considered that. So I want to take the time here to defend that idea of the common good. All right. So what I mean by common good is just in general. So whether it's a business or organization or nation, that there's a good that is common, that is, it's a good of the community itself. It's a good of the organization or group itself that you can distinguish from the individuals composing that. So you can't separate. There's a difference between separating and distinguishing. So you don't separate, but there is a distinguish between the individual good and the good of the group as a whole. So if you have a large group of people and a couple people are upset about something, but everyone else is okay with it, well, you could still ascribe that there's something good about the group, and those two individuals may not be happy about something. Nevertheless, that you can distinguish. You can distinguish between those. So that would be it's a good of the group as a whole, and not reducible down into its particular parts. Okay, though without, of course, you don't separate them. So we talk like this all the time when it comes to, say, a business or an organization or a club, or anything in which there's a sort of collective entity. So if we think of a business that's been around 150 years, we can think of that business as its own thing, as a real entity, even though the founding members of that business no longer, they're no longer with us. And yet we talk about it as if it's endured over this amount of time. We can talk about it, right? And we can say that it's a healthy business, or it's a good business. We can talk about perhaps certain attributes it's had over the span of time that we can ascribe to it. So we treat it as something different. So even if you have a club, let's say you started a chess club in high school or college, you can think about the club as in itself. People come in, people leave, it changes leadership, and yet the thing itself endures over time. Perhaps policies change over time, requirements to be included, perhaps if you have to give some sort of dues or money to be involved with it. All those things can shift, and yet we still say that this thing has endured over time, and it is a separate thing or a distinguished thing from the members involved with it. So we talk about this, and we ascribe again positive or negative attributes to these entities. So if we say, "Oh yeah, that's a good business," or that's a good club, or that's a good organization, or that's a good media group, or whatever it is. We're talking about something, we're ascribing something to that collective entity, all right? So we do this sort of thing, again, as I said, all the time. And often when we're in leadership, we think about how do we improve the organization. We actually have not only a conception of it in the past, we have a conception of it into the future. So oftentimes you'll hear leaders, I've heard this many times in the military, that you're assigned to a certain role, or let's say you're a commander of some unit. You know that you're not going to be most likely the last commander of that unit, and yet you want to make your mark on it such that it has a positive impact in the present and into the future, right? So anyway, you have a tradition or a heritage of it, and you have a leadership that impacts the future. So the present and the future, right? And so you have a conception. Again, we think of this thing, that this is what we do. In a way, we serve the good of the organization or the business or the nation, okay? Now, I think one of the reasons why people are hesitant to affirm a common good is because the left often is the group that uses. I remember the post-liberals, they call themselves post-liberals. I remember encountering these people maybe 10 years ago, and I don't think people use that as much anymore. But they would talk a lot about the common good. And this is usually people who are Christian, and so they would essentially affirm the traditional language, because this is a very traditional concept in the Christian tradition and the Reformed tradition. And so they'd use this, but what they really meant by it was a type of essentially left-wing sort of politics. It's redistribution. The impulse behind it was egalitarianism. You want to become this? You want to become a doctor? Well, that's what you want to become. So here's a scholarship, get in, now you're a doctor. Okay, we're going to lower the standards so that everyone can achieve their dreams. It's actually a form of left-wing individualism. Now, I will talk about a right-wing individualism moment, but there is a form of left-wing individualism, which fundamentally is a leveling or egalitarian sort of leveling, in which whatever you want to become, you can be elevated such that you can achieve that. And so really in the end, a left-wing common good is denying that there are significant differences between different peoples or different people, and then trying to use state action to raise everyone up. Essentially, the end is individualism. They have a conception of the public good, but the public good is simply a pool of resources that they can seize and then redistribute so that individuals can achieve their dreams. Okay? That's what left-wing common good is. Now, I understand then, you're surveying that, you see who's using public good, common good, and what do they do? That's precisely what the left is up to with this type of redistributive individualism to achieve your dreams with a vision of a leveled and egalitarian future. Now, we want to reject that. The left also, the left, this is what Sir Roger Scruton, the late Sir Roger Scruton once said, is oftentimes intellectuals they go toward the left because they recognize readily, perhaps from their intelligence, that there are these problems, but they're also problem solvers. Actually, that's kind of, in a way, what high IQ is. You identify problems and you seek to solve it. Well, you don't have the patience for things to work out on their own. You want to solve the problem. And so how do you solve the problem? Well, you create another government program. You create another set of bureaucrats to go attack the problem. And typically the left makes things worse, right? And then you mix with that certain feminine, empathy, toxic empathy, and actually make things extremely worse. So that's the left-wing impulse of the common good. They have a conception, we need to help the community, we need to save the community, this and that, save our democracy. And in the end, they make things worse. Now, the right-wing conception of the common good, see, there's the idea of just pure individualism is not historically right-wing. The right-wing conception of the common good is that they affirm hierarchy, so they're inegalitarian. And so the purpose of the common good is actually not to a level. It's not egalitarianism. It's not so that each individual can, dream up what they want to become, and therefore you get a pool of resources to make that happen. No, it's the good of the people as a whole. It's affirming nature, that there is a natural hierarchy, that there are some people who are going to rise to the top, some people are going to be in the middle, some people at the bottom, and that's just the state of things. So you think of the common good then, the common good is, first of all, it's the goodness, the beauty of the nation, right? It's the goodness, beauty of the nation. And so there would be more of a common good for people to achieve what is right morally according to objective standard. And you'd want that to be beautiful in various respects, which I'll get to more in a moment. So that's the idea. It's a sort of national greatness. It's not from this philosophical, like egalitarian impulse. It's actually in some way affirming a lot of the non-rational. Again, I'll get to that in a moment. So that's right wing, but that's not opposed to individualism. There is a conception of right wing individualism that I want to make clear. The opposite of individualism is not hierarchy. Okay, it's actually parasitism. It's parasites. That's what is contrary to individualism. Hierarchy and individualism is actually very much reconcilable. And that's because you just take I like to use the example of an infantry squad. An infantry squad in the U.S. military, and probably most modern militaries, is around 9 people. So you've got a squad leader, you have 2 team leaders, and then you have 3 members of the team. Now, each of those people actually has kind of a role. So obviously the leaders have a role. The squad leader ought to be good at managing those teams, and the team leaders must be good at managing those their particular team. Now, within a team, you have a grenade launcher guy, you have a machine gunner guy, the squad automatic rifle or weapon, the SAW, and then you have another one who's a rifleman. Now, that one of the SAW gunners could be the best SAW gunner in that squad, and yet he's not suitable to be the squad leader. Maybe he's just some country guy who loves shooting stuff, and he's really good at it. But you don't want him to be the team leader. You don't want him to be the squad leader. And so that squad leader, he should be proficient, of course, in the use of that weapon, but he may not be the best on the team, in the squad, right? Same thing with the team leader. Team leader might be excellent at identifying targets, managing his soldiers, moving them to the right location, all that sort of thing. And yet he might not be the SAW gunner. He might actually, that country guy might be the best SAW gunner. Same thing with the 2-3 grenade launcher. Anyway, the point being is you can have a cohesive unit. You can have a cohesive rifle squad with each individual excelling at their role in that squad in a hierarchy, and with each individual who are actually lower in the hierarchy, the best at their particular job, right? So you have individuals who are pursuing excellence within their lane, and yet in the midst of a hierarchy. There's no contradiction there. In fact, that's the best unit. And that's what you do as a leader is you identify talent for particular things, and you identify when or if they're worthy to move up in the hierarchy or never at all. I mean, I knew guys when I was active duty who were really great at their job, yet I would not want them to be in charge of anything. So anyway, that's my point. And that's a right-wing conception of the common good, is that each individual pursues what they're capable of, and you encourage that. And yet you don't, through some policy, raise those people up just because they have the dream of becoming a squad leader. Now, if they do have a dream, you coach and mentor them, and perhaps if they reach that level, you say, yeah, you become the team leader, squad leader. But anyway, it's all organic. It's all very natural. So hierarchy, and so that's the common good. The squad leader is looking for the common good of that squad as the leader of that squad by identifying individual talent to place those soldiers in the right place, right? That's the idea of the common good.
Stay safe. Mask up. Get the vax. Don't take unnecessary risks. Be careful. We've been coddled, smothered in warnings, trained to fear and avoid risk. We've been taught to play it safe and be on our guard. And not just against a scraped knee or a failed endeavor. No, we've been taught to censor our speech, our words, even our thoughts. Don't think those dangerous thoughts. Don't notice. Don't speak out. If you do, we're coming for you. Who's coming for you? It almost doesn't even matter. Whether it's the HR lady at your company of either sex, weaponized church courts, the social media censors, or even those you once considered allies. Watch out. Take care. Play it safe. But was it always this way? Have we always lived under this kind of stifling, wet blanketing panopticon? Is this the spirit of our Christian forefathers? Of the men who founded our nation in blood and in faith? willing to face down all the might of Britannia and her redcoats. There was a time when Americans didn't shrink from risk, when they would rather die than bend. Our Christian forefathers knew what it was to draw the sword and throw away the scabbard. They knew what it was to set sail for the unknown. They defied tyrants. They built, explored, and dared great things. Who settled this land? Who built one of the greatest nations ever to be? Who settled the West and covered the continent from sea to sea with a Christian people? Who searched out glories, crisscrossed the plains with railroads, and fought off usurpers and invaders on all sides? Risk wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Without it, our fathers knew, there was no greatness. And now, we're supposed to trade boldness for bureaucracy? We're supposed to tremble at the unknown instead of mastering it? We're supposed to bow and scrape, not even before bullets, but before HR ladies? We don't think so. It's time to remember who we are. This year, join us here at New Christendom Press for our annual conference, Safety Third, Recovering the American Will to Greatness. 4 days to forge new friendships, build coalition, and work to recover what was lost. It's time to reclaim the spirit that built this nation, to break free from fear, to risk, to build, to lead. The future belongs to the bold.
So, that's good. So in the nation, then you don't have programs of egalitarianism. You affirm hierarchy, you identify the best, you put the best in charge, and then you also encourage each individual to pursue their good, not only for their own good, not only for their own achievement, but for the achievement of the group. So a right-wing common good or nationalism is where the individual identifies himself not just as an individual, but as an individual part of a group, as fulfilling a role in the group together with others. All right, with others. That is a right-wing conception of the nation, and that is a right-wing conception of the common good. Okay. All right. Now, I also want to say that you have obligations to the group, and here is why. You have obligations in a civil society to the group. Now, this is based upon the nature of man. I think a lot of people nowadays don't fully conceive of how them as an individual, what they say that they are, is actually fundamentally dependent upon their living with others. So you can read Robinson Crusoe and you can see him achieve all sorts of great things by himself, and then he gets his man Friday and he's able to achieve great things. But you know what? He actually carried with him on that shipwreck to that island. He carried with him all that body of knowledge that he learned from England. So that there's a tendency of readers to read that book if you can get through it. It's a little dry. To think, well, that's individuality, but actually not. But really, you can achieve what your potential. You can become a master at something as an individual only because you exist with others. What do I mean? Well, if you're going to be a master carpenter, a master blacksmith, a master farmer, a master computer scientist, or whatever you're going to become a master at, you can only do that because some other guy has become a master of his particular trade, of his craft, of his vocation. If you had to do everything on your own, you would spend your entire time barely surviving to feed yourself. Growing food is not actually that easy. And especially if you don't have the implements or the various tools that other people have created. Of course, you could grow all your own food all you want if you had the tractors and all this sort of thing and the fertilizer. You've got all that. You could do that. But you know what? That's from other people making stuff. If you had to do everything on your own, probably most people would die. So what's my point? That's just the nature of man. That's as God created us. We need others. And so that means that you are only able to achieve your individual mastery of something because other people in a diversified group have been able to achieve their particular vocations at a master level. And therefore you can do exchange goods and services on that basis. Now, what does that mean? By your very nature, you need to live with those others to achieve your actual individuality. to achieve what you're great at. When you say, who are you? Well, I am this, I have these kids, and I work as a finished carpenter. Why are you able to be a finished carpenter? Why do you say that that's what you are? Well, because other people are other things, right? So what this means that your own individuality, and there's more to this, I think, as well, your own individuality is dependent upon the group, your participation in a life of a community of a diversified vocations, such that you don't have to focus about feeding yourself and your family directly from your own ground, but you can actually have the shop that builds the tools that the farmer uses or something like that, right? So that's really important. So I think for that reason, you have a duty to the group. You owe your existence and you owe the capability of you living well to the group. Right? So you actually have an obligation to them. Now, I know there's a famous statement of Obama saying something like, you didn't build that. You didn't build that. Yes, you built your business. Yes, you are the one who dedicated attention to your craft, your vocation. Yet, it was facilitated and made possible by everyone else around you. So you owe a debt of gratitude to that community, just like you owe a debt of gratitude to the ancestors that went before you or your grandparents, your parents. Why is that? Well, because they contributed to your very existence. And furthermore, I'd say you also have a commitment to your progeny. But anyway, so there is that element, okay? So and that's part, I think, of the common good. You should actually, as a member of the nation or as a member of the political community, you ought to see yourself, your individual, as oriented to the common good. And that's what you do. You make a product and you advertise it to the community. The community comes to you. You provide the service. You exchange the money, which is really just, money is just a retainer of value, right? A retainer of some sort of, you could say labor value, but that's not entirely accurate. But so anyway, they come to you. You're actually providing a public service. You should be outward oriented such that you are serving to the good of the community, not just the good to yourself. So that's an economic life. There's another aspect that I think that is overlooked, and that is the idea of social customs. So when I say that Christian nationalism is a totality of national actions consisting of laws and customs, the customs are very important. And I think we actually have lost that element of the common good. We've lost that almost entirely. Now, it used to be back in the old day that in order for you to be properly socialized into the way of life of your people, you would learn particular songs, you'd learn particular stories that you could retell yourself, and you'd learn particular dances. So think of, watch like the Pride and Prejudice movie where they're dancing around. They all kind of know the various dance moves to that song and that particular dance. That was an element of your socialization. And dance itself was a community thing. And the various dances and moves, again, as I said, were something you were socialized into. Now, that's just one element of various social customs that you're brought into. Knowing what to do in different places. Knowing what to wear to this particular event. Knowing what to say at this event. How to relate to people in this sort of event. All that stuff is actually being largely lost because we have little conception of the common good, also because of multiculturalism, also because of a sort of, I think, degraded individualism, where we think, well, we can do what we want. We can do whatever we want. And so you walk outside and you go to not only Walmart, just go to a fancy boutique and you see people dressed in atrocious ways, as if there's no concern at all for public decorum. So what is the common good is not just you recognizing your obligations to the community. It's also there being significant customs and social structures where you know what is appropriate for every space, what is appropriate for every occasion, what is appropriate for every event, knowing the various rules that your people follow, knowing the various dances and the various cultures that you're going to experience, you're going to live out in that world. We've completely lost that. And now to learn a traditional dance is like a hobby. Everything's been kind of, in a way, reduced to a hobby that you do. While everything else that is not a hobby has been homogenized down such that you wear and do whatever you want. See, you notice how that when one of the interesting things, once you lose a sort of higher culture social custom, everything in the end becomes homogenized. That is, because you wouldn't know what to wear otherwise. There's no expectations. There's no knowledge. And so in the end, everywhere you go, everyone's essentially wearing the same thing, doing the same thing. It becomes homogenized down into the same exact stuff. Whereas before, you would know precisely what to wear to a wedding. You know what to wear to a church. You would understand that you can dress down a bit when you go to a certain festival or whatever it is. But there'd be differentiation along those lines. And that was, again, that was thoroughly a part of the common good. Now, these things are not, the other thing we have to recognize is a lot of social expectations. There's no chapter and verse in the Bible that says you must do this or that. This is one where I think many theonomists are deficient. Not all, but many are deficient. And they don't recognize the need for human beings to have these very particular customs that are actually part of the expectation of you living in this country or in this city or in this town or in this country. There are common expectations of decorum. There's common expectations of fittingness, of what's appropriate, of propriety, right? And we've totally lost that because we've adopted a very modern individualist conception of, well, I need chapter and verse, or you can't tell me what I can do, or blah, blah, blah. And in the end, everything's homogenized into the most basic, same sort of decorum, and there's no actual sacredness. There's no shared space with higher expectations. Anyway, I won't beat that up anymore. But that is that is one of my concerns, okay? And that's when I say Christian nationalism is about social customs in a national way of life, or you could say within a regional way of life, or in a state or a county, whatever it is, I don't care. Those things are important given human nature. That is what cultural homogeneity produces. It produces where part of your socialization of children is teaching them these things so that they can enter into society with full knowledge of what to do in differentiated spaces. And that's what we need to recover. That's why one reason I'm excited about these projects in Tennessee with Ridge Runner. What are they doing? They're bringing like-minded people together in a way to restore all these shared practices, that they can restore them, that they can teach them to their children, and it can be part of the way of life of those people. People they're fleeing the left. They're actually just fleeing. I mean, they are fleeing the left in a way, but they're fleeing social disorder. They're fleeing a homogenized degradation. They're going to a place where in a way they can start over, where their children can be brought into and cultivate a differentiated shared space of decorum, of propriety, of fittingness. And so I'm very excited about that. All right. The other thing too about shared space, it's hard. This is not actually I think just explaining this, people are like, oh yeah, that's true. We share space, right? You can own property. You can drive down the road of a country road and look around and different people own that property. And yet you can see it. You see that countryside. There's on the drive to get to my house, there's this beautiful field, and sometimes there's cows there, and there's hills in the background. There's a barn there. It looks like a wonderful American landscape. And one of our obligations to others, even though we own that space, one of our obligations is to recognize that we share a visual plane, that we share a visual space. And so that means that if you're going to turn that into a warehouse, you're ruining a beautiful site for people who can drive down there. It's not entirely just simply your property. You can do whatever you want. I think you have an obligation. Now, we haven't got to state action yet, but you have an obligation to know that you, in the space that you own, have an obligation such that shared space, the visual plane, to make it in some way delightful, that it's fitting for the landscape, it's fitting for the people themselves. It actually is suitable such that you can look out and say, yeah, that's pleasant, that's beautiful, that's delightful. I think people do this in their own simple way. Like you have a mailbox in front of take a suburban, it doesn't really matter, suburban space. You have a mailbox, and what do you put next to the mailbox? You see people planting flowers all the time, right? Flowers. Are they doing that for themselves? Are they doing that simply so that when they drive up, they see the flowers? Or when they can look out the window, they see the flowers next to the mailbox? No, it's public facing. It's such that people can look over and see that as delightful. It's so people can look out there and feel like this is home. Not just a home that some people occupy, but a broader shared space in which people are experiencing, this is a delightful place. This is my home. And you can contribute through that. You ought to contribute to that through your own property for others, because we share this world with others. And those people we depend upon, and they depend upon us. An expression of loving your neighbor is making your owned space delightful for others. And that is part of the common good. You don't know who's going to see the flowers, probably your neighbors, but other people will see it as well. And that contributes to, again, the common good. All right. All right. So I hope we're thinking through these stuff. I hope this makes some sense. Now let's get to state action. Everyone's like, wait a second, Wolf, I agree to everything, but now you're doing state action. You're doing government. I hate government. Okay, well, fine. But let me give you some examples here where I think there is appropriate state action. The first one, this one everyone affirms, is the enforcement of contracts. Now, I understand that contracts are between two individuals or two parties or maybe more than that. And yet there's an enforcement there. When there's a breach of contract, you can take them to court. So I understand that. That's between individuals. But the proper and judicial enforcement of contracts does serve the common good, because then every time you enter a contract with people, no matter who it is, contracts themselves are going to be affirmed and carried out because there is a judicial system involved, right? So in other words, it encourages, it promotes the fulfillment of your obligations via contracts. So that contributes to the common good as well, right? That means you can approach people you don't know and you don't know very well, a stranger from the other side of town, enter into some kind of contract, and then you have that judicial system that buttresses that relationship, and it encourages and promotes fair, proper dealings with people. All right, so there's one. The other one is roadways. I've mentioned roadways in other podcasts and other situations. It's a good example of traffic laws are a good example of how things promote the common good. There's a common good in people being able to get from one place to the other. And when you think about it, the success of roadways and traffic laws is quite remarkable. I'm not saying it's unexpected, but it achieves a great deal. Everyone you see on the road is probably going to a different place. Most likely they started from a different location. So you're going from A to B, someone else is going from C to D, and E to F. And then there's thousands of people on the road all doing their own thing. And somehow all of this, each individual having their own interest in line to get to their end point, somehow that's all coordinated, at least in most of the United States. I know there's problems in other places in the world and also the major cities, but in most places I could get in my car right now and I could get with ease to pretty much anywhere I want to go within a 200 or 300, 400 mile radius right now. There's an expectation of that. I don't even have to think about it. I maybe have to plan my route a bit, but I don't have to worry about other things. And what is that? And why is that? Well, because there's rules to the road that have been enacted by the state, such that if everyone knows the rules of the road and they follow those rules of the road, it facilitates all those thousands of different interests on that road without much hindrance. And in fact, if you didn't have the rules on the road, you would have tremendous hindrance because people wouldn't know how to go about their travel, their movement. Just think about it. If you are, just drive down the road and imagine what you are doing while you are there. You are reacting to other cars and you're seeing what they're doing. You've seen where they're turning, what lane they're in, and you understand what they're up to. You can predict what they are trying to do. They're trying to turn left. How do you know they're trying to turn left? Well, the location of the car and the rules of the road. And so you can predict, you can react, you can be proactive. Well, all these sorts of things you can do on roadways because there's a shared set of rules by which you can move around. And those are typically shared throughout the entire country, which makes things very easy to move about. So that's a clear example of a common good facilitated by state action that we benefit from every single day, that we assume every single day, that we know subconsciously every day. And it's just been inculcated by a deep habit such that we can all move around on roadways. All righty. The next one is building a gas station. Building a gas station. Now imagine you will live where you live, whether it's suburbia or me out in the country, and your neighbor wants to build a gas station. And they say, well, I can do whatever I want with the property that I have. Okay. I want to build a gas station. Well, guess what comes with building a gas station on your own property? If it's like one of those big Chevron gas stations, the lights are tremendous. There's lights all over the place. That means that it's going to illuminate all the neighbors' houses and everything around it. So there's light pollution. Is there an injustice in having too many lights? Is it an individual injustice? I don't know. I guess I'm curious what a theonomist would say to that, like a sort of a non-legislative theonomist would say about light pollution. But that certainly comes to affect everyone around you, having huge lights on your property that would illuminate everyone around you. Also, it brings a lot of noise. Because there's people coming in, there's large trucks coming in, there's various, there's going to be a lot more traffic going down your road. Again, they're just going to that guy's property. There's the road and they're going to. So now it increases traffic on your road. And also it increases crime. Because typically gas stations are places where people commit crimes. I don't really understand why. I'm not in that world. But, everyone's been to a gas station and they see people loitering about and nefarious characters buying cigarettes. And so you just, it brings crime. So this guy has chosen to build something on his property that subjects the community around them to harm, has negative effects. And yet it's all on his own property, right? But that's not the case. It's not the case because it brings all sorts of things into your neighborhood, into your community that you would not want. And so for this reason, I think there should be zoning regulations that the county regulates, and they should regulate it properly, and that they should get a special use permit approved or disapproved if they want to build a gas station. And what this allows, it allows for the county to survey the landscape and say, yes, it would be suitable to have a gas station here. And then they survey the various effects. Is it near, a police station or patrols so that they can deal with the increased crime? Is the noise level going to not affect people around them or have a small effect if it's here? Or the lights, perhaps they can regulate how many lights you use. So there is a role, I think. And what's the purpose? The purpose is you do need gas for your car, like I just talked about roadways, and yet the proper placement of a gas station should be regulated so that it limits any sort of harm it would do to people around you, so that the good of having available gas would be higher than what any sort of detriment it would cause or any sort of negative externalities that would arise from it. So there you go. And what is that? Again, we're thinking of the good of the community, the good of others around you. It's not simply your property. Your property itself should be oriented to the common good. And in limited ways, the government has a role to do that for the good of everyone else. The other one is, and this is the last thing before I'm done, is land use. So this is very similar. But where I live out in the country. As I said, it's a beautiful country landscape. What happens though is we have people who live in places called Morrisville and Raleigh, which is to our east about 45 minutes to an hour. They have names you probably can't pronounce, similar to Ramaswamy. And they pool together all their money because they tend to be doctors and dentists and stuff. And they pool millions of dollars together in these LLCs. And then they go out and they buy huge chunks of property so they can build houses. They don't care about American landscape. All they care about is getting millions and millions of dollars in selling homes. They don't care about the look of homes. They don't care about the quality of homes. They don't care about the density of the homes. They just care about making millions of dollars by selling it. But they don't live here. They don't live around here. In fact, they might have traveled here once, and they traveled here once maybe to see the land. Because it could be that they just talked to a realtor who said it was good and they trust him, and so they bought it. They are doing that all around me, where I live. And so we have formed this little group, and this little group is trying to advocate for the county to do some restricted building. We are not opposed to building. We're not opposed to growth, but the growth ought to be appropriate. The growth ought to be such that it preserves the traditional landscape that we live in, because we live here, we like it. We do think people should be able to build homes, that there should be development, but it should be 3 to 5 acre lots. And that means that you have spread out homes. It doesn't destroy the landscape. It maintains, in that sort of thing, it maintains all the trees. We have beautiful hardwood trees out here. For some reason, most of where we live was not forested. So it's all old hardwoods. If you chop down all the trees, typically you replant it with pine, right? But it's all hardwood. I have beautiful white oaks out here, hickories. They're all over the landscape. People show up and they build tract housing. They're just going to demolish all that. So anyway, we've formed that group in order to fight back. Fight back such that these outsiders do not fundamentally transform this American landscape into, frankly, a type of hellscape. And this has happened in places around Raleigh. People who live around Raleigh are aware of what I'm talking about. Pretty soon, that beautiful landscape will be a mall. In fact, it'll be a parking lot because there's more parking than there is actual mall space. So anyway, that I think is another function of government, is to limit land use in that regard. That it should be smart development. It should be development that makes sense given the availability of resources, from transportation to schooling and other things. There's another issue of just water rights. We all out here are on wells, and there's no city or county water coming out here. So they're going to build a bunch of houses that are going to be very large, and they're going to rely upon well water. There's already water issues at the water table in the ground. And then what happens when we all run out of water? You could say, well, we could sue. Yeah, well, we still are out of water. We're still out of water. So anyway, that's what I want to emphasize there, that there is, you have a shared space, you have a shared interest in your community. There is private property ownership, but that ought to be oriented, it ought to be regulated in limited ways such that it contributes to the overall good of the community, so that my kids and my grandkids can enjoy a country landscape, that the road out in front of us is not busy with traffic constantly because there's a million houses out here, right? And also that there's a positive shared space that you, by your own instinct, plant the flowers such that people around you can enjoy it and say, this is home. That there would be, hopefully in the future, social customs that everyone know that we can do these dances. I mean, I didn't mention this before, but dances. I talk about homogenization. What has occurred in most dancing now? You go to clubs, you see people dancing. It's all like this solipsistic, like bodily jarrings or what's the word? Just it's not coordinated. It's all kind of expressivist. It's not social. It's not pro-social. And it used to be the case that even with folk dancing, there was some kind of, there was a community aspect to it. When there was even some folk dancing where it's individual, they're up on a stage, and what are they doing? They're oriented towards the community. They're not in their own world dancing around in sort of gyrations. They are focusing towards a community in a very self-affirming way, that this is us, this is what we do, this is the dance, look at what I can do. And I do this out of love for us, not out of love for me, such that you can recognize me and my individual expressivism. There was a pro-social element. So we as Americans in particular have to relearn this stuff and fight. In some ways, things have to become hobbies first, until perhaps you move to a community in which they're no longer just hobbies, they're a way of life. All right. And then lastly, as I said before, you're an individual, you're dependent upon the group for your own individuality. Not only for your self-preservation, but for your own mastery, to become who you are, for you to ascribe your own vocation to yourself, depends upon everyone else doing different things. And so for all those reasons, I hope I've convinced you at least that there is this thing called the common good, that we're not just a bunch of disparate individuals with, individual contracts to agree to certain things, that we as individuals and individuals through our own property, through our own public actions, our own public presence, have an obligation to the community. We have an obligation to the nation. We have an obligation to the region, to the country, to your town, to your rural landscape. And that is of utmost importance. Like if anything, if you read my book, Case for Christian Nationalism, I'm telling you, what I've explained in this video is really the key to understanding what I'm getting at. It's also the key to, to see how ridiculous it is when people say that, I'm a fascist or I'm a communist, or that's a new one. Or I'm like a totalitarian. No, that's not it at all. I use the word, I don't want to get into the word totality, but I just want our shared social world to be structured as it has been for most of human history. That there's a shared way of life with ways of doing things, with decorum, such that we would have not only a beautiful built environment, but a beautiful social world. A world of differentiation, of knowledge of what to do, of knowledge of this is appropriate and fitting and suitable and decorous. That's what we once had. That's what the whole world once had. That's what many people in the world still do have. But we don't in the West because we're committed to a form of corrosive individualism, multiculturalism, and a type of libertinism. I can do what I want. Where does it say chapter verse that I have to dance or do this and that? I can do what I want. It's the same stuff. It's the same impulse. It's not biblical. It's not Christian. No one would recognize that as Christian until very recently. So, going forward, we have to think more about how to restore this and resist these things. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And again, subscribe if you guys enjoy this content. And let's keep fighting, right? All right. Thanks. Bye.